All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to completely dismantle the assumption that a law has to be some sterile written document. When we think of law today, we usually picture massive, dusty books of statutes, courts and lawyers arguing over the exact placement of a comma, right? But we're taking a global journey through the roots of authorship to see how humanity has historically crafted the rules that actually bind society together.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit the monolith of text, law as sacred narrative, sophisticated oral constitutionalism, the Tang code synthesis, and tie it all together into a universal tapestry. It's a massive journey, stretching all the way from ancient Babylon to the Tang dynasty in China, over to the vast empires of West Africa, and deep into the woodlands of North America. We'll be contrasting those text-centric traditions with incredibly sophisticated oral ones, and ending with a system that perfectly synthesized the two.
Part 1. The monolith of text, consolidating empire through codification.
Tracking this across the timeline, we're starting with the absolute earliest monuments of codified law around 1750 BCE and 529 CE. But it's wild, because as we move forward to around 1100 and 1200 CE, we encounter entirely different paradigms of law that completely challenge our modern Western assumptions.
There is a huge contrast in these early text systems. Think about Hammurabi. He literally had his 282 clauses carved into giant pillars of stone placed right in major cities. I mean, talk about projecting state authority. Justinian, on the other hand, commissioned expert panels to compile centuries of Roman law into manuscript codices. But despite those differences, both of these systems relied completely on the physical text to enforce a sovereign's will. The written word was the ultimate, unquestionable authority.
Part 2. Law as sacred narrative, voluntary acceptance and methodological reasoning.
Now, think about the word halacha. It actually comes from the Hebrew root for to walk or to go. This is absolutely crucial because it brilliantly illustrates how law can be a lived, voluntary path rather than a strict set of state-enforced mandates. Unlike Roman law, which was backed by the heavy military might of an empire, Jewish law maintained its incredible staying power through voluntary acceptance by a global, often highly dispersed community over millennia. It's a system guiding everything from complex business dealings down to your everyday routines.
So the really fascinating point here is that the Talmud doesn't just list rules. Historically, we kind of think of the Talmud as having two totally distinct genres, but they are deeply integrated. It beautifully weaves together the technical law, the halacha, with these rich narrative stories known as agadah. The story provides the moral why, while the law provides the structured how. This integration makes the law the very medium for expressing deep religious sensibilities.
Halakha wears a frown, agadah a smile. I just love this quote by the poet Chaim Nachman Bialik. It cuts right through the complex legal jargon to remind us that behind the strict rules of halakha lies the warm, guiding narrative of agadah. The law and the story aren't enemies at all. They're partners in guiding a society.
Meanwhile, hopping over to the Islamic tradition, we see another brilliant form of reasoning that didn't rely on a single emperor's decree. Imam al-Shafi's 9th century text, the Al-Risala, established these vital steps for methodological reasoning. At the time, Islamic jurists were deeply split between strict textualists and flexible rationalists. Al-Shafi'i basically bridged this gap, which earned him the title the Father of Equilibrium. He created a system that was divinely grounded yet highly responsive to new socioeconomic contexts. It functioned almost like a living constitution.
Part 3. Sophisticated oral constitutionalism, governance without writing.
Okay, if you thought complex federal governance required a printing press, you might want to rethink that. The 1236 CE Mundane Charter of the Mali Empire proves just how remarkably organized an entirely unwritten constitution can be. Proclaimed by Emperor Sundiata Keita, it covered the whole shebang, from abolishing slavery by raid to environmental protection to sinankunya, which was a brilliant social system specifically designed to prevent conflicts between different clans. It is an incredibly modern-sounding framework for the 13th century.
But you're probably wondering, how on earth do you keep a constitution alive without writing it down? Well, the Mali Empire relied on griots, who essentially served as living human hard drives. This proves that oral tradition isn't just folklore. It is a highly formal and reliable legal system. These people were not just storytellers. They were highly trained institutional archives who could speak truth to power without any fear of sanction. They kept the laws alive by passing them down with absolute pristine accuracy.
Now, jump across the world to North America, and we find wampum belts, a totally different, yet honestly equally brilliant physical medium for preserving constitutional law. Instead of ink on paper, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy encoded their laws right into beautiful shell bead belts. The sequence of the pictograms acted as a sophisticated mnemonic device. It allowed a speaker to precisely recount complex laws and treaties just by reading the patterns.
This ancient oral tradition eventually transitioned into recorded history, preserving things like transcribed excerpts of the Iroquois Great Law of Peace. This was the oral constitution that successfully united 6 nations under the Tree of Peace.
And this Great Law of Peace was a total game changer. It was so brilliantly structured that it united warring nations into a participatory democracy long before Europe embraced the idea. In fact, it directly inspired the United States Constitution. Figures like Benjamin Franklin actually looked to this exact oral tradition as a model for federalism. Though it's worth noting, the U.S. founders distinctly left out the profound indigenous reverence for nature, like the mandate to give thanks to the natural worlds for up to 2 hours before any political assembly even started.
Part 4. The Tang Code Synthesis, Harmonizing Rule and Relationship.
Promulgated in 653 CE under Emperor Gaozong, the Tang Code became the absolute cornerstone for governance across East Asia. It influenced not just subsequent Chinese dynasties, but the legal systems of Korea and Japan as well. It's really just an absolute masterpiece of jurisprudence.
And here is where we get our perfect synthesis. The code had a rigid, almost mathematical legalist skeleton, known as FA, which scaled penalties precisely. We're talking measuring stolen property down to the exact bolt of silk. But it paired that with a flexible, relational Confucian soul, known as Li. This meant a crime was never judged in a vacuum. The exact same physical act would yield completely different punishments depending on the social status, the generational role, and the family lineage of the people involved. The law literally enforced the morality.
Because keeping that Confucian social stratification intact was absolutely paramount to the Tang dynasty, the code strictly punished what were known as the 10 abominations. By treating unfilial conduct, like, say, neglecting your parents, with the exact same severe, non-redeemable weight as outright treason against the emperor, the Tang code ensured that family hierarchies and state hierarchies were legally protected as basically one and the same.
Part 5. The Universal Tapestry, the Enduring Legacy of Law.
So, what have we really learned from all these basalt steles, living griots, wampum belts, and Confucian codes? Well, we've seen that the way we write, speak, and remember our laws fundamentally shapes the soul of our society. Ultimately, whether it's carved in stone in ancient Babylon, mathematically synthesized in silk metrics in Tang China, or spoken beneath the Tree of Peace by Haudenosaunee leaders, law is really just the story we agree to tell ourselves about who we are and what we value. Which leaves us with this final question to ponder. If our digital databases and written statutes vanish tomorrow, do we actually have the deep communal narratives and shared values to hold ourselves together? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this completely changed how you view the rules that govern our world. Keep questioning and keep learning.